rests on what happens in Glasgow over the next 2 weeks. The Prime Minister has said that COP26 is the world's moment of truth, and Sir David Attenborough has called it our last opportunity to make a change.
With the recent IPCC report showing that climate change is widespread, rapid and intensifying, it's clear that doing nothing is not an option. But given that the emission targets set out in the Paris Agreement 6 years ago are still a long way off being met, what are the hopes that world leaders can deliver a global and unified plan to speed up progress and tackle the issue?
And what can we do as individuals to face such an enormous and urgent global challenge? And how much can we adapt how we live in the future?
We've assembled a very knowledgeable panel to give us their thoughts on what COP26 can achieve, what it will mean for you.
Joining us are Fatima Ibrahim, Co-Executive Director of the Green New Deal UK and lawyer and founding CEO of environmental law charity Client Earth, James Thornton, named by The Statesman as one of 10 people who could change the world.
Also joining us is Jim Watson, Professor of Energy Policy at the UCL Institute for Sustainable Resources, who has acted as Special Advisor to the House of Commons Energy and Climate Change Committee, and the Right Reverend Bishop Graham Usher, Bishop of Norwich, and also the lead of the Church of England's environment policy. Welcome to you all. Jim, I'll start with you. Reducing climate change is a huge challenge with so many different factors, but briefly, in your opinion, what would be the best outcome we could hope for from COP26?
I think it's that overall the countries up their game and get closer to where they need to get in terms of temperature. At the moment, all the pledges from countries are adding up to a 2.7 degree world. And we need to get much closer to that 1.5 degrees. 2.7 degrees doesn't sound like a lot more than 1.5, but it's huge in terms of impacts. And I think the other thing I'd say in terms of success is we really need to see action in the short term rather than all the talk of the long-term targets. They're very important, but we need people at countries to say what they're going to do in the next year, the next 2 years, the next 5 years on the areas that we really need to reduce emissions from. Generating electricity, the way we travel around, the way we produce goods and services. So for me, success is really those short-term gains and agreements to make them tomorrow rather than in decades' time.
And in a word, Jim, is that likely?
I think some countries are moving in that direction and have detailed plans, but others are falling short. Either they haven't published plans or the plans are way too vague or not ambitious enough. So I don't think we're going to get all the way there. So one thing I really think Glasgow's got to agree as well is a very quick review and process to make sure that momentum is continued. Yeah. We're not going to agree everything over the next 2 weeks, but it needs to be revisited very quickly to make sure that action happens.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Fatima, as a young activist, what do you hope COP26 will achieve?
Yeah, good morning to you all. I mean, the person who just spoke before me, sorry I didn't catch your name, was absolutely right. This is just a 2-week conference, and we can't expect for us to be able to change the trajectory of carbon emissions and our hope to secure a livable future in 2 weeks. This is and I don't often agree with Boris, but Boris is right. This is a moment of truth. This is a moment for the world to see how much our governments have delivered in the 6 years since Paris. And what I hope and the realistic outcome of this conference will be is that movements are energized, that people at home are energized to keep their governments accountable, and that once these 2 weeks are over, that we go back onto the streets, we mobilize, and that we force our governments to deliver. If we think back to 2019 and how much the youth strikers and Extinction Rebellion were able to get our governments to do, the UK was the first country to legislate a net zero target in the G7. It called a climate emergency. It put together a citizens' assembly on climate. That was all done by people taking action on the streets, and that's what I have hope in, and that's what I hope we'll be able to get out of this conference is a further energized movement.
Yeah, so Fatima, people can keep their countries accountable. James, there are other ways as well, aren't there? You're an environmental lawyer dedicated to holding businesses and nations to account on their environmental action. So you basically represent the earth as a lawyer. We've all read about how some countries are trying to move the goalposts on this issue because, you know, their economies, to be fair, they rely on oil and coal, and why would they get rid of those things if it being employs so many people? Can we trust them, though, to stick to their pledges, and how legally can we to police this?
Well, let's start by agreeing with my colleagues who've just spoken. We need much greater ambition from the countries at COP on what their reductions will be. And then we need them to finance the emission reductions of the developing world. A lot of the countries who want to do the right thing are in the developing world, and they simply can't afford it because their economies have been particularly badly hit by COVID. So those two things. But then all the countries will go home. As Fatima was saying, it's a moment in a process. All the countries will go home, and will they do what they say? Now, this is a problem from the point of view of an environmental lawyer activist with every country in the world about every environmental law that's ever been passed. So the question then is, how do you get them to comply when they don't want to? The great thing is that law is an incredibly powerful tool in the hands of citizens to do this. So citizen activism on the streets and in the law courts. And here's what citizens have been achieving in the law courts recently. It's really quite dramatic and not often spoken of. So there's a group of children from Portugal who have sued 33 European countries in the European Court of Justice, saying that their human rights require greater reductions. I expect that they will win. There are citizen groups that have brought the countries of France, Germany, the Netherlands, and Ireland to court in the courts of those countries, and they've all won. And the courts have ordered the countries to make greater reductions. Shell, this works on companies too. Shell, the oil company, was taken to court by citizens in the Netherlands, and the court put Shell on a very serious emissions reduction diet and ordered it to come out with a net zero plan. Quite remarkable. My organization has stopped, a whole new generation of coal-fired power stations in the EU with law, and we've contributed to stopping several hundred in Asia from being financed, which essentially is the equivalent of stopping all of the emissions from the EU. Yeah. So very powerful tool when countries and companies don't move fast enough. Citizens need to take the law into their own hands.
I'm really inspired by all that, James. But really briefly, what happens then if, say, Shell don't do what they're meant to do? What's the punishment? Do they just get a small fine? Do they just sort of take it because they make so much money anyway? What is the stick to get them to do it? And keep it quite brief, if you will. Yeah,
sure. Very briefly, they could have very big fines, and their president could be put in jail.
Wow. That's serious stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, very, very serious. But I want to touch on another point. Bishop Graham, if I could come to you. There's been the University of Bath did a study which surveyed 10,000 young people across 10 countries, and it found that 59% of those young people surveyed were extremely worried about climate change. So for all of us, Bishop Graham, this issue is a scary one, and much of the coverage has focused on apocalyptic, consequences of warming. So how can COP26 help restore hope to those who feel hopeless?
Well, I agree a lot with what previous speakers have already said about what the ambition needs to be about doing more quickly, doing more generously, doing more together as a world community caring for this, our single island planet home. But we hear a lot from young people who are being immensely prophetic in their messages here. We saw the sequence earlier about young people who've walked as part of Christian climate action from Truro, the G7 summit back in June, to arrived in Glasgow yesterday. Their voices have been prophetic and hope-filled about the future. And we need to step up our action, both as a global community, but also as individuals, and looking at how we can change our own lifestyles to tread more gently on this planet Earth. I'm inspired by Jesus Christ, who kept noticing things in his natural environment, the birds of the air, the lilies, the trees in their due season, etc. And we need to notice much more, have our eyes much more wide open as to the impact of climate change, not only on our local environments, but also on the world's poorest people, particularly in the global south, because climate change knows no international borders. And already I'm hearing stories from part of the Anglican Communion's delegation here to COP26 about the impact of climate change on people's daily lives already.
And well, Jim, you already mentioned what we need to change in regards to travel and goods and services. But very briefly, what are the green choices we can make as consumers to make any substantial change?
Yeah, I mean, there is quite a lot we can do. Clearly, some of that depends on how much money people have. But things you can do, relatively easily are, for example, think about your diet and the mixture of sort of meat and dairy products you eat. It's not that you have to go vegan tomorrow, but actually cutting those things down can make quite a big difference to your carbon footprint. It's not an easy thing to do in the current climate of high energy bills, but considering switching your energy supplier to a greener supplier, that encourages those suppliers that get all their electricity from renewables or other green sources. And then if you have got the means to do it, next time you're thinking about buying a new car, you can think about an electric car. It's a much easier thing to do. They're getting a bit cheaper. They're still out of reach for many people. Taking more public transport. The big thing, which is tough for many people, is upgrading their home. And that's one which you need a lot of expert help and money and so on. I'm really hoping government in the UK is going to put its money where its mouth is on that one, because we really need to upgrade our whole homes so they're better insulated and they use greener heating sources. So that's not something many people can do very readily, but it's something we're going to need to do over the next decade or so.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because quite a few of those things, they cost a lot of money. It feels like a sort of upper middle class thing, doesn't it? Because getting an electric car, I mean, they're really expensive. All those things are sort of difficult. Fatima, I just want to bring you in here. We're all citizens as well as consumers. What would you say to anyone who wants to make their voice heard? Because I know you're doing it. You're taking 100 young people up to Glasgow, aren't you?
We're taking 100 young people up to Glasgow to stand in solidarity with many of the global movements that will be there, and global governments who will be looking to receive the financial support and technological support to transition their economies. But over the next weekend and next 2 weeks, there's going to be lots of actions happening up and down the country. I urge your viewers to search the COP26 coalition, and there'll be events and protests happening in every community up and down the country. And this is the moment that people can take action. And the most important individual action we can all take is to not be an individual, to join our communities, be in community with people, and take collective action, because that's when we're most powerful.
Yeah, I mean, James, actually, I've done this programme for years, and I don't think I've had a panel where everybody is in so much agreement.
Yeah.
And that's great, and that's so encouraging. And some of the stuff you said really inspired me, that, we can as individuals do stuff if we pull together in the way that Fatima says. Yeah. However, we are on the outside. Fatima's taking a group of people up to Glasgow. We're all here. Apart from you, we're sort of on the outside in terms of those decision-making things. Really, does it make a difference? Can we make a difference as individuals? Those people watching at home thinking, well, I feel quite hopeless about this. Can they make a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. And their participation is vital, as Fatima was saying. So, what's happened since the Paris Agreement was signed is that the science has become crystal clear about what we need to do and how we need to do it. There's really no dispute. That's one reason we're all agreeing. Reasonable people need to agree on this. The other thing that's happened is people around the world have woken up and become enlightened. And I mean enlightened in a very deep sense, that the world needs to change and we need to pull together on this as a community. And social justice will come out of solving the climate crisis. Nature protection will come out of it. All these things will. The part that hasn't is politicians. So learn what to do and pressure your politicians.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say, we've had 25 COPs and we haven't met the, this is such a positive message today, but we haven't been doing the right thing up until now. So how is it going to change, really? Is it going to?
Well, look, I mean, the question is whether it happens fast enough. Things are moving in the right direction, and that's why I use the law to speed up change, requiring companies, requiring governments to do the right thing, and then we can get there. But it really requires everybody to pull together and to share a vision of a positive world in which we can live, an ecological civilization we can build together, in which we all want to work, live, and have kids. And with that vision, the demand to the politicians will require them to move much more quickly.
Okay. I've heard a lot about COP26 and I feel so positive. I've never felt so positive about it, so it's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
On a Sunday morning, that's exactly what you need. Well.